my mother also wrote the obituaries for all the Black people in the Potomac Valley. Where I grew up is halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington in the Allegheny Mountains. And Piedmont's a paper mill town, overwhelmingly white, Irish, Italian paper mill town. And we had a weekly newspaper. And then 5 miles away in Kaiser, that was a county seat, they had a daily newspaper. So when anybody Black died, their obituary was published in both places. And my mother wrote all the obituaries for all the Black people. And not only did she write them, she would go to the funeral and stand up and read their eulogy, which was basically their obituary. And before I started school, I would get all dressed up. You know, there are no babysitters. We were too poor for that. And my mother would take me by the hand. We'd walk down to the church and I would sit there. And I'll never forget it. It was like seeing a vision to hear the magical words, which I had watched my mother write, then come out of her mouth, and then watch the response of people in the church. Often they would break down. So it's only recently that I realized that though I'm not a great storyteller like my father, and I'm not a great writer like my mother, though they combined to create a model for me that is part of my DNA.
That's right.
And that's really true. But I want you to read this quote from Du Bois. Now, we've all read The Souls of Black Folk. And you know his chapter of the Faith of Our Fathers, which is about the importance of the Black church. Thus, one could see in the Negro church today, reproduced in microcosm, all the great world from which the Negro is cut off by color prejudice and social condition. Practically, and this is the key part, a proscribed people must have a social center. And that center for this people is the Negro church. Now, that is basically the epigraph for my book and for this film series. Because I've become intrigued with how, when the color curtain of Jim Crow came crashing down with the collapse of Reconstruction, what did Black people do? Well, so many of us think that all we did was protest, but that's not true. What we did was replicate the white world from which we were denied access. And that had started before the Civil War with the first institution that our enslaved ancestors created, and that was the Black church. Our enslaved and the free Black ancestors who were living in both the North and the South, ironically. In 1773 in Savannah, Georgia, the first African Baptist church was formed. And I went there and I filmed. And, you know, there is in the balcony on a pew, inscribed, carved into the wood, an odd language, right? And nobody knew what it said. So we flew down a linguist from Harvard to translate it. And he looked at it and it's Arabic.
Wow.
It's Arabic, man. It was like, that's just to underscore the high degree of Muslims who were part of the enslaved population. So 3 years before the American Revolution, our people had formalized their religious belief in a church proper, and that was the first African Baptist church. And then the second organization that our people formed was the Masons, the Prince Hall Masons, which were formed officially in 1784. But then Bethel AME was formed in 1793. And we all know the story of Richard Allen Absalom Jones.
Philadelphia.
And then the first denomination officially was 1816, which is the AME Church. So I'm interested in lifting the color curtain and looking at all these institutions that our ancestors replicated. When, you know, I have 3 generations of dentists in my family, a couple generations of doctors, a couple of generations of lawyers. When they couldn't get in the AMA, they formed the NMA, the National Medical Association. When they couldn't get in the ADA, the American Dental Association, they formed the National Dental Association. And on and on and on. When Prince Hall couldn't get in the Masons, he formed the Prince Hall Masons. So rather merely than protest, which is very, very important, of course, and which we did, starting with the abolition movement, but it certainly extending back to the collapse of Reconstruction. But we also formed a legion of social institutions. So I decided that I wanted to tell that story, but I wanted to start with the biggest one and the first one, which is the church. And the church was crucial to me and to the formulation of our people. Let me talk about the latter. There wouldn't have been African-American people without the church. Our people, as a culture, were formed out of their religious beliefs. And when you think about, Cornel, when I was writing this, I thought of you, but the church was a performance space. It was like the Yale School of Drama and Juilliard and a School of Oratory all rolled up into one.